Why do you think that most of us grow up without really learning how to spend thoughtfully?
I had until 4 years ago that nothing needs to be said on the topic of spending money because it's obvious what you do. You just spend more of it and that's better. And I think it's similar to the psychology of investing. It's not what you know. It's about like the soft psychological side of how you interact with topics like greed and fear and envy and distrust and those kind of topics that all play into this idea.
Is there anything you can do in the young age?
I think the answer is probably no. That everybody has to learn this the hard way. The times in your 20s when you've experienced really happy contentment, really strong jealousy, and everything in between from those two spectrums, those are really powerful learning.
What do you think is the realistic first step that they can take to break free?
Utility is like you're making your life better, more comfortable. You're hanging out with the people that you want to hang out with. Status is let me try to put on a display for strangers who aren't even paying attention to me to begin with. And so I think you instantly understand that when you try to envision your life in a world where nobody else is watching.
皆さんこんにちは。ファンドアナリストの篠田翔子です。本日はサイコロジー・オブ・マネー、そしてアート・オブ・スペンディング・マネーの著者であるモーガン・ハウゼルさんにインタビューを行います。サイコロジー・オブ・マネーは日本でもベストセラーになっていまして、多くの方読んだという方もいらっしゃるんじゃないでしょうか。日本のメディア初ということで、ちょっと今緊張しているんですけれども、まずですね、このサイコロジー・オブ・マネーの、ある種続編になるアート・オブ・スペンディング・マネーについて、ちょっと感想も含めて、お話をしますとですね、これ、もともと私は原著の英語版で読んでいて、その後日本語版を読んだんですが、英語版を読んだ時の感想と日本語版を読んだ時の感想が微妙に違った。つまりは、日本語で読んだ時には、これは日本の読者にもものすごく当てはまるなっていうふうに思ったんですね。これが、なんかこう、ちょっとある意味不思議な感覚になった、とても、面白い感覚になりました。はい。お金の使い方というのは、やはりお金の貯め方や増やし方とセットで語られることが多いですが、どうしてもそれぞれのその国であったりとか文化によって影響を受ける面が多いと思うんです。ただ、この、アート・オブ・スペンディング・マネーは、サイコロジー・オブ・マネーの、その心理学的な要素も多分に踏まえながら、お金の使い方について掘り下げられていて、決してアメリカとかですね、その海外の読者だけではなくて、日本の読者にも本当に当てはまるなと、ハッとさせられる場面が非常に多い本だったので、たっぷりと、お話を伺っていきたいと思います。So, Mr. Housel, again, thank you so much for joining me today. So, your book, The Psychology of Money, has been read very widely here in Japan, and many readers don't just enjoy it, but they really try to live by the ideas in the book. So today I'd love to talk about your new book, The Art of Spending Money, not just as a follow-up, but as a shift in perspective from saving and investing to spending. So, and just to note, I heard that this is your very first interview with a Japanese media outlet. So I'm really excited to explore how these ideas connect with the Japanese readers.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
So did you ever imagine that your book would be widely read here in Japan?
I didn't think it would be widely read anywhere. That's what's really interesting about books. I think this is also true for like music and movies and things, is that it's actually very difficult to know what's going to work. And so it's really hard to put your finger on what's going to work, why it did work, why some things didn't work. It's always hard to tell. I kind of like that aspect of it. I think there's like an intangible aspect of a lot of social trends that that can't be quantified. It's just kind of a thing that like once they take on a life of their own, they just keep going.
Right. So in the psychology of money, you focused on the importance of saving, but in the art of spending, you deliberately move the focus on the spending. And reading both, I felt that the way we spend money reveals who we are just as much as saving, I think even more. So why did you feel that now was the right time to focus on spending?
I don't know if it was the right time right now, but here's where it kind of came from. It was if you and I had this conversation 4 years ago, and you asked me about my philosophy of saving money and investing money, I could talk to you for hours about it. But then if you asked me a question 4 years ago and you said, "What is your philosophy for spending money?"
Right.
I would have drawn a blank. I hadn't really thought about it that much.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me was really interesting. I had been doing this for 20 years, thinking about psychology of money and behavioral finance. And I never really thought for a second about the psychology of spending. Right. And then as I started looking into it, just as like a personal self-development, I realized that there's almost no books written about this topic either. And that to me, like it's pretty rare that you can find what seems like a big topic that impacts everybody that has kind of been ignored in that. So that to me was really interesting. And then so that to me, it just started this self-exploration of figuring out my own spending. And I wanted to be honest with myself and ask, when have I been envious of others and why? When have I been really happy and content and why? What kind of spending has been really helpful for me and why? I just started asking those questions and pulling on those threads to dive deeper in this topic.
I see. But I think a lot of people say that saving is hard, but I felt that after reading your book, I actually felt that spending well is harder. And what do you think that most of us grow up without really learning how to spend thoughtfully?
I think there's a knee-jerk reaction that almost everybody has, and that I had until 4 years ago, that nothing needs to be said on the topic of spending money because it's obvious what you do. You just spend more of it, and that's better. And that if you spend more, you'll be happier. And I think that can be true. Some people can do that, but you don't have to dig very deep into this topic to realize that it's much more complicated than that. That there are some people who spend tens of millions of dollars a year and get very little out of it. There's some people who can spend $50,000 a year and have an amazing life, and everybody in between. And I think it's similar to the psychology of investing, where there are some people who have a PhD from Harvard and work 100 hours a week trading in the stock market and lose all their money. And there's other people who know nothing about investing, but they have patience and they have a calm demeanor and they invest in a diversified fund and leave it alone for 30 years and make a fortune. And so it's not what you know, and it's not always obvious. It's about like the soft psychological side of how you interact with topics like greed and fear and envy and distrust and those kind of topics that all play into this idea.
I see. How about the cultural background? I read both the original English version and the Japanese edition of your book. And even though the content is actually it's the same, but the emotional impact felt a little different. So how much do you think the culture shapes the way we think about spending money?
I think it's huge. And here's what's interesting. Forget America versus Japan. Even within America, and I'm sure within Japan, there's so many different cultures. Right. And so where I grew up in the United States, this might my point of view might not resonate with somebody who grew up in Florida or New York or Alabama. And it's completely different. And not only is it geography like that, it's generational. So my generation thinks about this differently than my parents' generation. And my kids' generation might read this book 20 years from now and say, what was he thinking? That's not how we think at all. And so that to me, I tried to make that point in the book that we're all different. And there's no right answer on how to do this because my culture is different from everybody else's culture. Your culture is different from everybody. We're all unique in our own ways. And it's not right or wrong. It's just what makes sense to you, given the world you live in, given your social aspirations, given your own unique sense of risk and greed and fear, things like that.
So let me stay with Japan for a moment. People here often value security, stability, and not standing out too much. How do these values show up in the way people spend money and how satisfied they feel after spending?
It's a great segue from the previous question because culturally they can be so different. And there are some cultures and some people in certain countries that nothing feels better to them and makes them happier than social signaling, than having the fancy car, the fancy clothes, the fancy house as a way to signal to other people or to signal to themselves that they've made it. It feels so good for them to do it. There's other cultures, other people for whom that would be like the worst thing that you could do is show off your money, show off your wealth. They want to be low-key, understated. And so there's no right way to do that. I think even people that want to be low-key and understated, they can still spend a ton of money and have an amazing life, but they're doing it for themselves. They don't care what anybody else thinks of it. There's people who drive Ferraris and they could not care what anyone else thinks of it. They do it because they love the craftsmanship and the engineering and the art of it. And they love that. And so I think no matter what lifestyle you live, there's two ways to do it. One is because it makes you happy and gives you a better life. And the other is as a way to compare yourself against others and try to socially signal to other people. And it's not right or wrong, but I think what the first one of those, when you're doing it, using money as a tool to live a better life, rather than as a yardstick of status to measure yourself against others by, is what's so important.
So I think that relates to your idea of independence. And that idea really stayed with me. There's a chapter titled Wealth Without Independence is a Unique Form of Poverty. And it feels like, many people fully appreciate the value of independence until their 30s or 40s. And there's a constant comparison, especially through social media nowadays. And they seem to make it harder than ever. So why is independence so hard to recognize when you're young? And why does modern life make it even more difficult?
When you're young, I think what tends to be true, this was certainly true for myself, that if you don't have a lot of job skills, life skills, relationship skills, it's very easy to try to get your respect and admiration from other people based off of your material possessions. And so a lot of like for the people who really want to live a big fancy life, it tends to be the younger people. And then as you get older, you're like, no, actually, I want to gain my respect and admiration from a family who loves me, coworkers who admire me, friends who really understand me. And then so my desire to show off physical things diminishes from there. I think that tends to be the case.
Right. Is there anything you can do in the young age?
It's a very good question, because I think the answer is probably no, that everybody has to learn this the hard way. It is extremely rare that you would meet a 20-year-old who really deeply understands these philosophical topics. And I think even someone who is really going out of their way to read about it and learn about it, you have to learn about it the hard way. Not impossible, but you have to do it. And that's, I think, your 20s for a lot of people, for every generation, every culture, tend to be just a learning decade. You're just trying to learn the hard and the good and the important lessons of life. And there's very little amount of reading or thinking that can teach you in the way that experiencing will. And so the times in your 20s when you've experienced really happy contentment, really strong jealousy, and everything in between from those two spectrums, those are really powerful learning. And some people learn from that and then change their way of life, change their goals and their attitude. I think other people, even when they experience it and experience the downsides, find it difficult to detach themselves from that personality, and it sticks with them through adulthood.
And I think that a very practical version of that shows up in numbers, that a lot of people feel anxious about, like benchmarks, like I should have this much saved by my 30s or 40s. And how can people step back from those numbers without becoming careless or irresponsible?
There's a great idea that's been around for a while of instead of goals, you should have systems. And the difference is, a goal is, I want to save $100,000. That's a goal. A system is, I save 10% of my paycheck every month. And that's a completely different thing. One of the issues with goals is if you fall a little bit short of it, you feel like you failed. Whereas if I just say, I'm going to save 10% of my paycheck, and that's the best that I can do, and that's good enough, and that's a balanced life that lets me live a good life, but I'm still saving for the future, that's really important. And this is true for a lot of things. Like saying that you want to lose 10 pounds is a goal. Saying I'm going to exercise 3 times a week is a system. And it's a much better way to go about these things. A lot of that reason too is because if you reach a goal, you don't know what to do next. So let's say you say, I want to save $100,000, and then you do it. What do you do next? Do you spend it all? Do you versus if you have a system, I'm going to live a balanced life and save 10% of my paycheck forever. Then you don't have to change once you eventually reach that goal.
In terms of that, I think the Japanese people are very good at working with the system. So in Japan, the people's anxiety often leads to very specific pattern that people tend to worry a lot about the future. And as a result, they end up becoming the richest person at the end of their life. And so if someone wants to get more comfortable with healthy spending, what are some of the things that they can do in the early ages?
In the United States, we have a fair amount of this too. If you talk to financial advisors, they will tell you that one of the most difficult things are clients who are, let's say, 65 years old and they're retired and they have a ton of money. They saved their whole life. They saved millions of dollars and they cannot spend it. They just they can't do it. It's too scary for them to spend it. Some of that I think is actually pretty rational because we're fortunate enough to live in a world where a lot of people are going to live into their 90s, maybe even age 100. And so the idea that if you retire at age 60, you might have literally 40, you might have a half a century in front of you to fund. And so that idea of like, I want to be really careful that I don't overspend my retirement savings is actually a very rational thing to do with. Now, of course, you can take it too far and it starts to control your identity. And the balance between that is difficult. I don't know if I've done a very good job of that myself. And I don't know if I will do a very good job of that when I'm older. Now, there's part of me that wants to think, and it's different for everybody, but the idea of growing your money, living very conservatively, living a good, happy life, and doing the things that you want to do and not being held back, but still, as you're older, having a ton of money that you eventually leave to your heirs or to charity, whatever it might be. There's part of me that's like, that's a really cool life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that life if you're happy doing it. Now, some people might not be. And when they reach their older years, they look back and they say, I should have traveled more. I should have spent more. I should have bought a second house, whatever it might be. So the key that you always want to think about is how do you minimize regret? Trying to imagine yourself in the future, looking back and saying, how can I make sure I have the fewest regrets looking back at my life as possible? And that will be different for everybody, of course.
So you shared your story about buying your house in the book. So when do you think it's actually healthy to let emotion lead, not just logic?
I think most big purchases, house, car, college, all those things, I think a lot of those are probably best at an even intersection of heart and head. There is some emotion that's going into it. And there's also some calm, cool spreadsheet thinking into it. So those big things, the house that I buy, the college that I go to, the car that I drive, when I retire, those are emotional topics and we shouldn't pretend that they're not. We should not pretend that that's a math equation to solve. That is a big thing that's going to impact your life and have a huge impact on who you meet and the lifestyle that you live. And so the idea that there's sometimes when we can look at that and be like, look, the spreadsheet tells me I should go this way, but I really think I'm going to be happier if I go this way. And I can't really justify it, but I really feel good about this decision. The intersection of those right at the middle, I think is a sweet spot. If you only view it as a spreadsheet problem, like a math equation, that's a very boring life. If you only just follow your heart without thinking about the numbers, you're going to run yourself off a cliff before long. That's a very dangerous way to live.
And another idea that really resonated with the readers, I guess, is the quiet long-term process. So many people think they understand compounding, but their behavior suggests otherwise, I guess. So what do people most commonly misunderstood about long-term growth and quiet compounding?
I think one of the biggest for long-term growth is underestimating what we mean when we say long-term. And it's true that if you ask most investors, are you a long-term investor? They'll say yes. Like they want to be they think they're long-term investors. But if then you drill down and you say like, what does long-term mean? Like what is the definition of long-term? You might be surprised how many of them will say 6 months or 12 months or 3 years is like definitely long-term, which if you have like an understanding of how compounding works in the history of markets, when we say long-term, we mean 10, 20, 30, 40 years is really what we're talking about. That's what long-term is. And so it's not that people can't do long-term. I think they just underestimate what that actually means. I think that's the biggest problem. Now, it's also true that some people can't envision their life more than a year in the future. And so when you say save today so that you can be better off 30 years from now, they're like 30 years, that might as well be 30 million years from now. They can't envision their life in that. I think some people just have a better sense of that. And there's a great quote from Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, where he says, it's good to have empathy with your future self. Like wisdom is having empathy with your future self. It's acknowledging that you're going to be alive 30 years from now and you need to be kind to that person. You need to be kind today to yourself 30 years from now.
So when it comes to wealth, many people say that they understand the difference between being wealthy and becoming rich. Why does social pressure still push us toward looking rich instead of building wealth? And why do people most commonly get wrong about that distinction?
I think it's very common that we overestimate how much other people are paying attention to us. That it's easy to think that in a competitive world, everybody else is constantly looking at you and sizing you up. And I think the truth most of the time is they're not. There have been some very interesting studies that I thought were so brilliant in their design, where these researchers they took a woman and they made her wear a very ugly sweater, just like a hideous sweater. And then they sent her into a party. And then she would go into the party and mingle around with people. And she came out, and the researchers would say, how many people in the party do you think noticed your ugly sweater? And she would be like, everyone, this embarrassing sweater, everybody knows. And then they would ask the people in the party, hey, did you notice the woman in the ugly sweater? No, nobody's paying attention. Nobody noticed it. They're all busy in their own conversations. They're all self-conscious about themselves. And so the idea that nobody is thinking about you as much as you are, and that we overestimate how much other people are looking, is really important. Now, it's true that I want to fit into my social group, the social group that I choose. I want to fit in with my friends. And that requires, of course, that I dress a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way. So it's not that you don't care what anybody thinks. You're picking your social group, and you acknowledge the humility that people aren't thinking about you as much as you are. Now, a lot of this too is like, who do you want to gain your attention from? The strangers are not paying any attention to you, by and large. They're not even noticing you. I desperately, though, want to gain the attention and the admiration and the affection of my family and a couple of my friends. And so that's the social group that I really want to put effort into their admiration. And by and large, like, what do my kids admire me for? Not for my clothes or for my car. They admire that I'm spending good time with them and I'm a good parent. What do my friends admire me for? That I'm a good friend and that I listen and that I spend quality time with them. And so you have to define, like, who do you want your attention from? And what do those people actually admire you for? And that's very different from the what will strangers give me attention for game.
For someone who feels stuck under other people's expectations, what do you think is a realistic first step that they can take to break free?
I think it's important to imagine, like, to play a game in your mind and say, if I were on a deserted island where nobody could see what I was doing, nobody could see the clothes that I wore, the car that I drove, the house that I lived in, you're cut off from the rest of the world. How would I choose to live? And some people in that situation would live a life not too different than they are right now. But I think in that situation, you immediately understand the difference between utility and status. Utility is like, you're making your life better, more comfortable. You're hanging out with the people that you want to hang out with. Status is, let me try to put on a display for strangers who aren't even paying attention to me to begin with. And so I think you instantly understand that when you try to envision your life in a world where nobody else is watching.
How about the social media and also the generative AIs? Like, the technology, I guess, has amplified many of these pressures. So social media, I think, isn't good or bad itself, but like clearly makes other people's lives more visible. So how has that changed the way we think about money, success, and what enough actually means?
I think it makes it so much harder. Or I should say, it makes it so much easier to live in a world where you're actually doing pretty well, but to feel like you're falling behind. I think it's true that if you were a median income earner 30 years ago in America or Japan or anyone else, you are right in the middle. By and large, you probably felt pretty good about yourself. You probably looked around and you're like, I'm doing great. I got a little house and I got a little car and I take little trips and, like, that's a great little life. And I think because of social media, it's so much more common that the median earner looks at themselves and says, I'm falling way behind. And the sad thing about it is just the iron rule of math is that 50% of the population has to be below the median. That's just how it works. And so when social media is constantly showing you the top 1% of moments from the top 1% of people's lives, you fall into this world where even if you're doing just fine, you're even doing great, 100 times a day that you open up your phone, it's an endless stream of people who appear to be doing better than you, who appear happier, prettier, more successful than you are. And so what is the solution for that other than spend less time on social media, spend more time outside in person with your friends? I think that's the only solution to it.
How about generative AIs? Like, now we're entering into a world where AI can do everything for you, even an advice on investing or saving and even life planning. So maybe for like people in the 30s or 40s, what kind of mindset help them use tools like social media and AIs without letting those tools define those values?
I think in many ways, what social media did is it showed us content that was going to deliver the most FOMO, the most fear of missing out. And almost it was going to deliver content that's going to make you the most anxious because that's what you're most likely to engage with. And I think generative AI just does that on steroids. It's that times a million. And I'll tell you, this happened last week. I found this picture on Instagram of like a kitchen design. And I showed my wife and I was like, it's so beautiful. Like, look how they did this. It's so, and she was like, it's fake. It's AI. Like, it's not even real. And so the idea that like, 5 years ago, social media was really good at showing you people like fake moments from people's lives. But now it knows exactly what's going to set you off and make you the most anxious. And it can just deliver that out of whole cloth and give you the fake version of it. I think it just makes the problem 10 times harder than it's been. I do think that you're starting to see this in small amounts from Gen Z, from the youngest generation of social media users, that they will probably be the first generation that rebels against it. The first generation who's like, this is a game and it's an unhealthy game. And I'm much happier putting my phone down and going for a walk. I think they'll be the first ones to do it just because this has been the absolute core of their life versus older generations where it's been a tool that came into our lives when we were adults. But we remember a time before. I think that the people who've never seen anything else but social media in a counterintuitive way might be the first people to rebel against it.
Is there any way that we can use generative AIs for our life planning or the way we build our life planning?
There's a million things that I've done with it, of asking tax questions, asset allocation questions, estate planning questions, vacation questions that are phenomenal. I think that's an amazing thing. And opening up that kind of information to people is fantastic. And I think just from a financial perspective, it was not that long ago, 30 years ago or so, that if you wanted to learn about how to save for retirement, you had to go pay a financial advisor and pay them a lot. And by and large, unless you were rich, you couldn't afford to pay them. And then 10 years ago, it was, we have blogs and information that you can go learn about yourself. And it's just so much more superpower now, where it's like now the AI like knows who you are, how old you are, how much money you make, and can custom plan in language that you will understand a financial plan for you. Can that be dangerous? Of course. Can that give you bad information? Of course. But it's just, if you compare what it was 30 years ago, it's an incredible tool.
Well, thank you. So to close, I'd like to bring this back to the Japanese viewers. And for people in their 30s and 40s in Japan who are entering the peak years of wealth building, if they want to keep investing for the future without sacrifice present, what is the one piece of advice you most want them to hear?
I think it's two things. One, you really have to understand and think more selfishly in a good way about your own goals, your own desire, your own personality, even if it's different from other people that you read about or even different from some of your peers. This is a very individualistic endeavor, and what works for me might not work for you. I think that's a huge one. The other one is I would try to spend more time thinking about who you will be in the future, imagining yourself in the future, and taking actions today that are kind and beneficial to your future self. Everyone knows I know how to be kind to other people. I know how to be kind to my family and my friends and my coworkers and whatnot. Being kind to yourself, not just today, but taking actions today that yourself 30 years from now will appreciate and be grateful for, and spending more time trying to envision that, the better off you'll do.
So when you say future, that doesn't necessarily mean 30 years from now, but maybe 5 or 10 years could also be the future for yourself too, right?
Sure. Even next month can be, can be yourself. With the power of compounding, the biggest results, of course, are going to be later in the future. But absolutely, there's results that I can do today, saving money, whatever it might be, that myself 30 days from now, let alone 30 years from now, will appreciate and be grateful for.
And finally, on a personal note, is there something you've spent money on recently that made you think that was absolutely worth it?
We do little trips with our family, and not big ones, but little ones, even if they're like local. And I think what's true is that a lot of the value in travel, it's not where you're going. It's not the destination. It's not the view. It's not the beach. It's uninterrupted time with people whose company you enjoy. Now, you can do that close from home, but I think that's what it is. If I'm at home with my kids, we all kind of get sucked into our own little activities, and we're all on our devices and whatnot. But if we go somewhere, even local, all of a sudden, there's nothing to do but spend quality time with each other. And that's as good as it gets.
I think, yeah, I do really think that way too. So I think that really captures a lot of what we've been talking about today. So not just about money, but intention, independence, and I guess a peace of mind as well. Okay, thank you very much. So this actually was your first interview with the Japanese media, and I am really confident that your ideas will stay with many viewers long after this conversation ends. So thank you very much, Morgan, for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
いかがでしたでしょうか。いやー、ちょっと実はどんな方なのかなとか、モーガンさんがですね、ちょっと気難しい方なんじゃないかなとか、どうしてもサイコロジー・オブ・マネーの印象が強かったので思っていたんですが、とてもフランクで、かつ温かみのある方で楽しかったです。はい。また、インタビューの中ではですね、いろんな例なんかも挙げながらお話しいただいて、やっぱりこういうこの引き出しの多さですよね。これがもう、本の中でもたっぷりあるんですけれども、実際お話を伺っていても、その引き出しの多さにただただ圧倒されました。もうそして、面白かったと同時に、勇気づけられた面も多くありました。皆さんもそうだったんじゃないでしょうか。やっぱりお金を使うって結構勇気のいる行動だと思うんですけれども、自分がどうしたいか。決してその20年後、30年後だけではなくて、なんなら30日後、1年後でもいいというふうにお話ありましたけど、自分がどうしたいのか、どうありたいのかっていうことをとにかく大切にしてほしいっていう、だからそのメッセージが随所に込められていたような気がしました。本当に楽しいインタビューでした。ぜひ、皆さんもですね、アート・オブ・スペンディング・マネー読んでみてください。また、英語版と日本語版、もしチャレンジできる方いらっしゃったらですね、読んでいただくとちょっと印象変わるんじゃないかなと思うので、そういう読み方もおすすめです。
PIVOT では新たなメンバーを募集しています。特に営業と映像制作を担うメンバーを積極採用中です。募集の詳細につきましては概要欄の URL をご覧ください。ぜひ一緒に日本をピボットしましょう。